Millionaire saves fainted mother and her 3 babies at park. What he did next will bring you to tears. Before starting to watch this story, tell us in comment section from which city you're watching this story. Let's enjoy this story. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in Central Park, New York City. The trees swayed gently with the breeze, and the distant sounds of joggers, cyclists, and families enjoying the sunshine filled the air. John Matthews, a 42-year-old millionaire entrepreneur, had been feeling the weight of his success lately. His business was booming, but it had come at the cost of his personal life. His days were filled with meetings, deadlines, and decisions that could make or break the company. Today, though, he needed a break. He needed to escape the fast-paced world he had built for himself, even if just for a few hours. John had always been drawn to nature, and Central Park had a calming effect on him. It was a place where he could disconnect from the chaos of the city and find a little peace. He parked his car by the side of the road and took a long, deep breath as he looked up at the vast greenery ahead of him. He walked down the path, enjoying the soft crunch of the gravel under his shoes, and found a quiet bench by the lake. He sat there for a moment, closing his eyes and letting the stillness of the park surround him. For a brief second he forgot about the emails, the phone calls, and the relentless pressure of his business. As John sat on the bench, lost in his thoughts, he suddenly heard the sound of babies crying. His eyes snapped open and his head turned toward the source of the noise. About 30 feet away he saw a woman in her early 30s, stumbling on the path. She had 3 babies in a stroller, and the poor woman seemed to be struggling. Her face was pale and her breathing was shallow. The babies, perhaps a few months old, were crying loudly, clearly upset by the strange situation. The woman took a few more steps before she collapsed onto the ground. John's heart raced as he sprang to his feet, immediately rushing to the woman's side. As he approached, he saw the distress in her eyes and the fear in her expression. The babies were still crying, their tiny faces flushed with confusion and fear. Without hesitation, John knelt beside the woman, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She didn't respond. Her body trembled slightly, and it was clear she was in no condition to answer. John quickly glanced around looking for help. The park was usually full of people, but at that moment, it seemed eerily quiet. There was no one nearby who could assist. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, dialing 911. As he waited for the operator to pick up, he tried to rouse the woman again. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked, shaking her gently. Finally, her eyelids fluttered open. She blinked several times, clearly disoriented. Her eyes met his, and for a moment she seemed to struggle to focus. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "Help is on the way," John reassured her, trying to calm both her and the babies. The crying of the infants made the situation even more urgent. He felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand by and wait. The operator on the other end of the phone responded, asking for details. John quickly explained the situation, describing the woman's condition and the fact that the babies were still crying, likely hungry or frightened. "Please hurry," he added. "She's not in a good state and the babies need attention." As he hung up the phone, John noticed that the woman was starting to regain some of her strength. Her breathing had steadied a little, but she was still pale and weak. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and worry. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't know what happened. I didn't feel well." "You don't have to apologize," John said kindly, offering her a reassuring smile. "Just hang on. Help will be here soon." The woman nodded weakly. She seemed to be fighting to stay conscious, and John could see the exhaustion written all over her face. He looked at the babies again, their cries still echoing in the air. He could hear the desperation in their tiny voices, and his heart ached for them. He could only imagine what this woman had been going through, trying to take care of 3 babies on her own, without any support, and now, in a moment of complete exhaustion, she had collapsed in the middle of the park. Just then a jogger came by and stopped. She had seen the woman fall and was now approaching cautiously. She must have noticed the babies' cries, as she quickly knelt beside them and began to comfort them. "They're hungry," the jogger said, glancing up at John. "Do you know if she's breastfeeding?" John shook his head, unsure. He had no experience with babies, let alone caring for 3 of them. The jogger, noticing the confusion in his eyes, suggested that he try to calm them down while she made a quick run to get some help. She gave John a quick nod before sprinting off. For the next few minutes, John did his best to soothe the babies. He gently rocked the stroller back and forth, trying to offer whatever comfort he could. The tears in their eyes slowly began to subside, and their cries grew quieter. Still, the woman was barely conscious, and John felt a growing sense of responsibility for her and her children. Finally, the sound of sirens filled the air, and moments later, an ambulance arrived. The paramedics rushed to the scene, quickly assessing the woman's condition and taking her vitals. One of the paramedics instructed John to stay with the babies while they transported the mother to the hospital. As the woman was lifted onto a stretcher and placed in the ambulance, John's mind raced. He couldn't just leave the babies in a hospital, especially not with no one to care for them. As the ambulance drove off, John stood there, the weight of the situation sinking in. He looked at the 3 babies, still in the stroller, now silent but clearly needing more care than he could provide on his own. Something in him stirred, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He couldn't just walk away. He knew deep down that this wasn't the end of the story. What came next would change all of their lives in ways he could never have imagined. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. As the ambulance sped away, John stood motionless in the middle of Central Park, the cries of the babies still echoing in his ears. The jogger who had stopped to help him had already disappeared into the distance, and the area around him was starting to feel eerily empty. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. His heart raced as he realized that he was left alone with 3 infants who needed immediate care, and their mother was somewhere in a hospital, unconscious, with no one to look after her children. John couldn't simply walk away, not after everything that had happened. He couldn't leave the babies in a hospital nursery, surrounded by strangers, with no sense of stability or comfort. He made up his mind then and there. He was going to take care of them. His first instinct was to call his assistant, but then he stopped himself. He didn't want to involve anyone else just yet. This was something personal, something deeper than just helping a stranger. He couldn't explain why, but something inside him told him he had to step up. He took a deep breath and walked over to the stroller, where the babies were now resting in an uneasy silence. Their tiny faces were still flushed, their eyes heavy with the exhaustion of the ordeal they had just gone through. John gently lifted the first baby from the stroller, a little girl with soft curls of dark brown hair. She gazed up at him with wide eyes, her face still puffy from crying. Her tiny fingers grasped at his shirt, and John felt a jolt of emotion in his chest. He wasn't used to this, the overwhelming responsibility of caring for someone else's children. But there was something in her gaze, something that made him feel as though this was meant to be. He carefully lifted the other 2 babies, one boy and another girl, both about the same age as the first. They were quiet now, their sobs turning into soft whimpers as they clung to him. John held them all gently in his arms, unsure of what to do next. His mind raced, but he kept his focus. He couldn't leave them here in the park, not with no one to look after them. He scanned the area for a moment and then made a decision. John had a luxury car parked nearby, a sleek black sedan that was his pride and joy. It was a symbol of his hard work, his accomplishments, but today it felt out of place. The car was supposed to be a tool for business, not a makeshift nursery for 3 babies. But for now it would have to do. He buckled each baby into their respective car seats, securing them as best as he could, trying to soothe them with soft words and gentle rocking. The sound of their crying still echoed in his mind, but as the car engine hummed to life, it started to drown out the noise. Driving out of the park and onto the busy streets of New York, John felt a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. He had no experience with children, especially babies this young. He was a businessman, not a father. But something in him knew he had to do this. The mother's face, pale and weak, flashed in his mind. She had been fighting to take care of her children on her own, and now they were in his care. It was a responsibility that weighed on him heavily, but he refused to back down. John's mansion, located on the outskirts of Manhattan, was only a short drive away. He lived alone, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and success, but he had never felt lonelier. His friends were few and his family was scattered across the country. He had built his empire from the ground up, but it had come at a cost. His life was full of business deals, meetings and constant travel. The idea of settling down, of having a family, had never appealed to him. But now, as he drove through the streets of New York, he realized just how much he had been missing. His life had been built around work, and yet, as he held these babies in his arms, he realized that there was something far more important than all of his achievements. When he arrived at his mansion, the house felt too big, too empty. His staff had gone home for the evening and he was alone in the vast space. He carried the babies inside one by one and set them down in the living room. They were still quiet, their eyes fluttering in exhaustion, and he could tell they were on the verge of falling asleep. John didn't know what to do next. He had no idea how to care for babies, let alone 3 of them. He didn't even know where to start. He paced around the living room, his mind racing, until he finally sat down on the couch, cradling the babies in his arms. He spent the next few hours in a haze, feeding them formula, changing their diapers, and trying to comfort them whenever they cried. He had no idea what he was doing, but he followed his instincts, which told him that they needed his attention and care. Every time one of them would cry, his heart would race and he would rush to calm them down, unsure of how to do so but desperate to help. It was exhausting both physically and emotionally, but John didn't want to give up. These babies needed him, and in that moment he couldn't let them down. Eventually the babies fell asleep one by one in their bassinets. John sat back on the couch, completely drained but also feeling a strange sense of accomplishment. He had done it. He had cared for them and they were safe. But as he looked down at them, something shifted inside him. He had always believed that success was measured in terms of wealth, of status and power. But in this moment, as he watched over these innocent children, he realized that true success was about something else entirely. It was about making a difference in the lives of others. It was about compassion, about doing the right thing even when it wasn't easy. As the evening wore on, John couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The mother, wherever she was, would need help. He couldn't just leave it at this. He had to find out more about her, about why she was struggling and how he could make her life easier. John knew that this experience, this moment of unexpected responsibility, had changed him forever. He had come to Central Park seeking a moment of peace, but what he had found was something far more meaningful, a sense of purpose. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. John's thoughts kept drifting back to the events of the previous night. The babies were safe, but their mother was still in the hospital, unconscious. John had tried to find out more about her, but the hospital staff had been tight-lipped. They didn't give out information about patients without authorization, especially in cases where the patient was unconscious and unable to provide consent. John understood the rules, but it didn't stop him from feeling a sense of frustration. He couldn't just sit around waiting. He needed to know more. He needed to find a way to help. The morning sun streamed through the windows of his mansion as he sat in his study, staring at the wall. His desk was covered with papers, documents related to his businesses, but none of it seemed important anymore. His life, which had once revolved around profit margins and market shares, now felt hollow in comparison to the responsibility he had taken on. He wasn't sure what to do next, but he knew he couldn't back down. He had promised to take care of those children, and he wasn't going to break that promise. John had never been a man who made promises lightly. He had built his fortune by keeping his word, by following through on every commitment. But this was different. Taking care of babies wasn't something that could be managed with spreadsheets or business strategies. It required something far more delicate: patience, compassion, and a deep understanding of the needs of others. John had always been driven by success, but in this moment he realized that true success wasn't about numbers or accomplishments. It was about making a real difference in someone's life, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was truly doing something meaningful. The day passed in a blur of phone calls and meetings, but John couldn't focus on any of it. His mind kept returning to the mother and her babies. He had to find a way to help her, to make sure she would be okay. After finishing a particularly long meeting with one of his business partners, he decided to take a break. His hands were shaking as he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. He needed to do something. Anything. His thoughts were still spinning when he pulled up outside the hospital where the woman was being treated. John stood at the entrance, unsure of what to do next. He wasn't sure if he was allowed to visit the mother, but he knew he had to try. He stepped inside and approached the receptionist. "I need to speak with a doctor about a patient who was brought in last night," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The receptionist looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "I'm afraid I can't give out any information without authorization," she replied. "Do you know the patient's name?" John hesitated for a moment. He hadn't asked the mother's name the night before, and he didn't want to seem like he was overstepping. But he had to know. He had to find a way to get through. "Her name is Sarah Williams," he said finally, trying to sound confident. "She was brought in with her children. She fainted in Central Park." The receptionist nodded, her expression softening slightly. "I'll have the doctor speak with you," she said, picking up the phone. John waited, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what kind of information he would be able to get, but he was determined to find out more. It wasn't long before a young doctor appeared in the lobby. She was in her late 20s, with a friendly smile and a calm demeanor. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Dr. Emily Henson," she said, extending her hand. "I understand you're looking for information about Sarah Williams?" John shook her hand, his grip firm. Yes, that's right. I'm looking after her children. I just want to make sure she's okay. Dr. Henson looked at him for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. I'm afraid Sarah's condition is still critical. We're running some tests to figure out what caused her fainting spell. She's stable for now, but she's still unconscious. It may take a few days before she regains consciousness if she does. John nodded, trying to process the information. What caused it? Is she going to be all right? Dr. Henson hesitated before answering. It's difficult to say at this point. There's a possibility it could be related to her physical health, perhaps a reaction to stress or exhaustion. But we're also looking into other factors. We're doing everything we can. John's mind raced. Sarah's condition was worse than he had thought. But he couldn't just walk away. He had to stay strong for her children, for the babies who needed him. Is there anything I can do to help? He asked, his voice earnest. Dr. Henson studied him for a moment, then nodded. If you're serious about helping, you can continue looking after her children. They need stability, and right now they're in good hands with you. But beyond that, you can donate to their medical expenses. We're trying to get them the best care possible. John didn't hesitate. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, his voice firm. I'll take care of their medical bills. Just tell me what I need to do. Dr. Henson smiled softly. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'll make sure the family gets the help they need. As John left the hospital, his mind was racing. There was so much to do, so much more than he had expected. But he couldn't back down. He couldn't just walk away. He had promised to help, and he would keep that promise. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, meetings with doctors, and spending time with the babies. John had hired a nurse to help care for them during the day while he continued working. He had also made arrangements for Sarah's medical expenses, paying for her treatment without hesitation. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about giving Sarah's children the stability they needed, a sense of security in a world that had suddenly become uncertain for them. As the days passed, John found himself growing more attached to the babies. They had become a part of his life, and he had become a part of theirs. Every time he held one of them, he felt a sense of peace that he had never experienced before. The business world, with all its hustle and bustle, now seemed so far away. His priorities had shifted, and he knew there was no turning back. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The sun was barely rising over Manhattan when John stepped into the nursery he'd had furnished in a single weekend. The soft coos of the babies greeted him like music, filling the once quiet wing of his spacious home with life. He had barely slept, still in the clothes he had worn the night before, but exhaustion didn't matter anymore. His days were now a blur of formula bottles, diaper changes, whispered lullabies, and endless thoughts of the unconscious woman whose life had somehow become entwined with his. Each baby had a distinct personality. The oldest girl, Molly, was always alert and watchful, her curious eyes tracking every movement with intelligence. The middle child, Lucy, was gentle and easygoing, always quick to smile. And the youngest, Jake, cried often, needing the most comfort, the most reassurance. John had never raised children, and this was far from anything he had imagined for himself. But as odd as it all felt, it wasn't unwelcome. The media had begun to pick up whispers of the mysterious businessman who had rescued a mother and her children in Central Park. A few blogs speculated about his identity, but John had taken deliberate steps to keep everything quiet. He didn't want attention. This wasn't charity for a camera lens. It was personal. Deeply personal. He was still trying to figure out why. Maybe it was because of something his own mother used to say when he was a boy, about how kindness had the power to save lives. Maybe it was because, somewhere deep inside, he knew the man he'd become had drifted too far from that truth. Maybe helping this small, broken family was his chance to come back. He called the hospital 3 times that morning. Sarah still hadn't regained consciousness. Her vitals were stable, but there were no answers. No history. No emergency contacts. Nothing. It was as if she had been invisible until the moment she collapsed. But people don't just disappear in New York City. Someone must have known her, worked with her, seen her. He hired a private investigator, a woman named Diana who came highly recommended. She was sharp, relentless, and had a reputation for digging out the truth even when it tried to stay buried. I'll find out who she is, Diana told him. No one just falls off the map, not even in a city like this. That gave John a thread of hope to hold on to. That afternoon he took the babies for a walk in Central Park. It was a strange sort of full circle. People watched him with surprise. This tall, well-dressed man with 3 tiny children in a high-end stroller, but John didn't care. As he passed by the very bench where he had found Sarah slumped over with her children crying helplessly around her, he stopped. He stared at it for a long time, the memory playing in his mind like a loop. That single moment had changed everything. He had always believed he was in control of his life, that money could shield him from anything unexpected. But nothing could have prepared him for this. And for the first time in years he was grateful for something unpredictable. That evening Diana called. She had found something. Her name really is Sarah Williams. Originally from Kansas City, Missouri. She moved to New York 4 years ago. Worked a string of jobs, mostly retail and some temporary gigs. Nothing stable. She was evicted from her last apartment 3 weeks ago. That's likely why she was in the park. She had nowhere else to go. John felt a pang in his chest. The idea that she had been homeless with 3 babies, walking the streets in the cold spring air, was more than heartbreaking. It was infuriating. In a city with billionaires, tech empires, and more resources than most countries, a mother had to sleep on a park bench. And no one noticed. He thanked Diana and hung up, the details spinning in his head. It explained a lot. Why Sarah had no emergency contacts, why she had fainted, why the babies had seemed so used to being outside. They had been surviving barely on their own. And he had stumbled upon them by pure chance. That night, he sat beside the crib as Jake finally drifted off to sleep. He watched the baby's chest rise and fall, so small, so vulnerable. He thought about his own childhood, how different it had been. His mother had stayed at home, his father had worked as a mechanic, and though they had been poor, they had never been hopeless. There had always been someone to turn to. Sarah had no one. Except now maybe she had him. 2 days later, Sarah opened her eyes. It happened while John was at the hospital, sitting quietly in her room reading news on his phone. She stirred slightly, and then her eyes fluttered open, confused and unfocused. John jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. Hey, it's okay, he said gently, leaning toward her. You're safe. You're in the hospital. You fainted. But you're going to be okay. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes filled with tears. And that moment, so silent, so raw, hit John harder than anything had in years. He called the nurse, who rushed in to check vitals and assess her condition. Sarah was weak but stable. The doctor explained she had suffered a severe bout of exhaustion, compounded by dehydration and malnutrition. It was a miracle she had held out as long as she did. When John mentioned the babies, her eyes widened in fear and she tried to speak. They're okay, he reassured her quickly. They're safe. With me. At my house. I've been taking care of them. I promise they're fine. Sarah's entire body relaxed. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Thank you, she whispered hoarsely. John stayed by her side for the next few hours, listening as she slowly began to speak more. She told him about how she'd lost her job, about the landlord who had thrown her out, about the shelters that were full. She hadn't eaten in 2 days before she fainted. And all she could think about in those final moments before everything went black was what would happen to her babies if she didn't wake up. John didn't tell her about everything he had done just yet, about the nursery, the medical bills, the investigator. He just let her speak, let her tell her story in her own words. And every word she said made him more determined to never let her or those babies fall through the cracks again. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Sarah's release from Mount Sinai Hospital came sooner than expected. Her strength was returning, and though she was still thin and her cheeks were pale, the doctors were impressed by how quickly she was recovering. The only thing stronger than her body, they said, was her will. John stood outside her room with a coat draped over his arm, unsure of how to act. For a man who had closed multimillion-dollar deals with the cold confidence of someone who always had the upper hand, this moment made him feel strangely nervous. When Sarah stepped into the hallway wearing the same shoes she had been found in and a pair of donated jeans and sweatshirt, her eyes met his and she smiled, softly, hesitantly. Are they okay? She asked first. Molly, Lucy, Jake? John nodded. They're perfect. And very excited to see you. He offered her the coat. It's cold today. She hesitated, then took it with a quiet thank you. The drive to his place was mostly silent, but it wasn't awkward. Sarah kept glancing out the window, watching the passing buildings like someone seeing New York for the first time. She had been in the city for years, but she had never seen it from this side of life, safe, warm, behind the glass of a luxury car. When they pulled up to his townhouse in the Upper East Side, her mouth parted slightly. This is where you live? She asked. For now, John said, trying to downplay it. And where the kids have been. I thought it'd be better than a hospital nursery. She didn't say anything, but her expression said enough. Gratitude, disbelief, confusion, It was all there. Inside, the babies were with Maria, the nanny John had hired just days earlier. A warm, capable woman originally from Vermont, Maria had taken to the children as if they were her own grandchildren. When Sarah stepped into the nursery and saw her babies, she fell to her knees. Molly squealed and reached for her, Lucy babbled something unintelligible, and Jake crawled forward with a cry that sounded like relief. Sarah hugged them all at once, her arms trembling as tears rolled down her face. John quietly stepped out of the room, giving them a moment he knew didn't belong to him. Later, over a simple dinner Maria had prepared, grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, steamed vegetables, Sarah sat at the table across from John, still taking in the surroundings. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. Her voice was steady now, more sure of itself. "You don't have to," John replied. "You don't owe me anything." She looked down at her plate. "I didn't expect someone like you to care." That struck a nerve. "I didn't expect myself to care either," John admitted. "But something about that day, it wouldn't let me go. I couldn't just walk away." She nodded, and they sat in a silence that felt like understanding. Over the next few days they began to fall into a rhythm. Sarah insisted on helping with the babies, even when Maria told her to rest. She made bottles, changed diapers, read stories in soft voices, and paced the nursery floor with Jake in her arms until he fell asleep. John watched all of it from the background, amazed. The woman who had once looked like a ghost on a park bench was full of life now, frail still, but strong in a way he hadn't seen before. He realized he liked having them there. It made the house feel like a home, not just a collection of expensive furniture and silent rooms. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the skyline, Sarah opened up more. "I used to think this city would change everything," she said. "I came here with dreams, like everyone else. But dreams don't pay rent. And once you fall behind, it's like quicksand. Every time you think you're getting back up, something else pulls you down." John listened, not interrupting. "I was working at a pharmacy downtown. They cut my hours, then my benefits. Then came the eviction notice. I stayed with a friend for a while, but she had kids of her own. I tried shelters, but they were full or didn't take families. I ran out of options." She paused. "I thought maybe if I just made it through one more night in the park, something would change. And then I passed out." John felt a tightness in his chest. "You don't have to go back to that," he said. "Not now. Not ever." She looked at him carefully. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "You don't know me." He was quiet for a long time before answering. "Because someone helped my mother once. When I was 5, my father left us. We had nothing. My mom worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. One night, she fainted from exhaustion. A stranger brought her to a clinic and left money for her treatment. We never knew who it was. But it saved her. And it saved me. I always said I'd do the same if I ever got the chance." Sarah didn't speak. She didn't need to. There was something sacred about the space between them in that moment. 2 people from very different worlds, both shaped by loss, by survival, by unexpected grace. They didn't know what the next step would be, or how long this fragile connection would last. But for now they had this. A beginning maybe. Or a healing. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. It was early morning when the townhouse began to stir with the quiet rustle of new life. Jake's soft cries filtered through the baby monitor, prompting Sarah to rise before Maria could even knock. The days were beginning to form a pattern, predictable, gentle, almost ordinary. For the first time in years, Sarah woke up without the weight of uncertainty pressing against her chest. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman slowly returning to herself. Her cheeks had color now, her eyes clearer, her shoulders less tense. But still, there were questions that tugged at the edges of her peace. Questions about how long this life would last, and what she had to do to keep it. John had a meeting downtown that day, but before he left, he paused in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, and watched as Sarah poured cereal into tiny bowls for the twins while balancing Jake on her hip. There was something undeniably magnetic about the way she moved, the way she mothered. It wasn't perfect or polished, but it was real, and it made the house feel more alive than it ever had. "You're getting pretty good at this," he said casually, taking a sip. Sarah smiled over her shoulder. "I've had a little practice." He leaned on the counter. "I was thinking, if you ever want to go back to work, I can help. I have friends in pharmaceuticals if you want to pick up where you left off." The idea startled her. She hadn't thought beyond diapers and bottles. "I don't know," she said. "It's been a long time. I'm not even sure I still belong in that world." John shrugged. "Sometimes all it takes is someone to open a door." Later that day, as the kids napped, Sarah sat alone on the back terrace, watching clouds drift across the New York sky. For the first time, the thought of having a future didn't feel impossible. She could almost see it now, her kids growing up in safety, her working a steady job, maybe even finishing the degree she'd left behind. But still, there was that lingering discomfort. The fear that all of this could vanish. She knew people didn't just rescue strangers without expecting something in return. And though John had never made her feel like she owed him, she couldn't help but wonder, what did he really want from her? That evening, as they sat in the living room after dinner, she finally asked, "Why didn't you just call social services?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, just curious. "You could have handed us over and walked away. Most people would have." John looked at her for a long moment, considering his words. "I thought about it, but something didn't sit right. I saw how you were holding Jake even when you were unconscious. You didn't let go. That's not someone who needs to be separated from her kids. That's someone who just needs a chance." She was quiet, absorbing that. "You don't know how rare that is," she whispered. "Most people don't even look at you when you're down. You become invisible." He nodded. "I've been invisible before too." That confession surprised her. "When?" she asked. "Before I had money. Before I was anybody. I worked in a garage out in Queens for years, barely scraping by. I lived above it in a room that smelled like oil and mold. I know what it's like to be overlooked." There it was again, that strange connection between them. Two people from different timelines, drawn together by the same quiet ache. That weekend, John invited her and the kids to join him at Central Park. The idea of returning there, the place where everything had gone wrong, made Sarah hesitant at first. But something in her wanted to face it. Not to relive the moment, but to reclaim it. To let her children play where they had once cried. To let laughter echo where despair had hovered. As they strolled through the park, strollers and diaper bags in tow, John noticed how Sarah's posture had changed. She walked taller now, not just from better nutrition or rest, but from dignity. And when Molly ran toward a swing set giggling, Sarah followed, smiling like someone who finally believed the world wasn't always against her. While the kids played, John sat beside her on a bench. "Do you want to stay here forever?" she asked quietly, eyes still on the children. "New York." "No. This house. This life." He considered her question. "I don't know. I've always moved from one thing to the next. Companies, investments, cities. I never stayed long enough to ask if I was happy." She looked at him then. "Are you happy now?" He didn't answer right away. Then with a slight nod he said, "Closer than I've ever been." They didn't talk about what that meant, not directly. But something shifted after that. A deeper awareness that whatever this was between them, this strange shared space, it was growing roots. It wasn't romance yet, and it wasn't obligation. It was something else. Something more fragile but also more honest. The next day, Sarah found an envelope on the kitchen table with her name written in John's neat handwriting. Inside was an acceptance letter for a re-entry program at NYU's School of Pharmacy and a note. "I didn't want to assume, but I thought you should have the choice." Her hands trembled as she read it. He had done this without asking. Without her begging. Without her compromising herself. It was a gift, yes, but also a message. "I believe in you." She walked to his office and stood in the doorway. He looked up, surprised. "You don't have to say yes," he said quickly. "It's just an option." Sarah smiled, holding the letter to her chest. "It's more than an option," she said. "It's the first time in a long time someone saw more in me than just a mother trying to survive." John stood, and for the first time they embraced, not out of gratitude or sympathy but out of something unspoken, something gently blooming. Sarah sat in the campus cafe, her fingers nervously circling the rim of a paper cup. It had been over 8 years since she'd last stepped into an academic setting, and though the NYU reentry program was designed for people like her, adults with gaps in their education, it still felt surreal. She dropped out just a semester shy of graduation when life had spiraled. Now, sitting among students with backpacks full of dreams, she questioned whether she truly belonged. Yet somewhere in the pit of her stomach was that unfamiliar flicker of hope again, the same one she'd started to feel since moving into John's home. He hadn't just saved her physically that day in Central Park. He'd quietly, steadily handed her back the pieces of her identity she thought were gone forever. After her orientation, she walked through Washington Square Park to clear her head. Leaves rustled beneath her shoes, and the breeze carried the scent of warm pretzels and city life. She thought about her kids, how Molly was starting to read, how Max had finally learned to ride a scooter, how Jake giggled every time the sunlight hit the kitchen floor just right. And she thought about John, how he hadn't once hovered or made her feel indebted. He'd simply encouraged her, supported her, and then stepped back to let her stand. That evening when she returned to the townhouse, Maria was in the living room with the twins, reading them a story in her thick Brooklyn accent. Jake was dozing peacefully in the playpen. John was nowhere in sight. She found him later on the balcony, a glass of red wine in his hand, staring out at the skyline as dusk softened the edges of Manhattan. "Hey," she said softly, sliding the glass door closed behind her. He turned, surprised but glad to see her. "How was orientation?" She gave a small smile. "Terrifying. But good. I think I'm actually doing this." He nodded approvingly. "Of course you are." Then after a pause he added, "I signed up for a mentorship program at a youth center in the Bronx. Thought maybe it's time I did something with my time that doesn't involve spreadsheets and profit margins." She raised her eyebrows. "Really? That's surprising." He chuckled. "Don't sound so shocked." "No," she said quickly. "It's just, you never talk about your personal life. It's hard to picture you doing anything that doesn't involve boardrooms or business calls." He looked thoughtful. "Maybe I needed to meet someone like you to remember that I'm allowed to care about something more." It was such a simple sentence, but it landed heavy in Sarah's chest. People often assumed millionaires lived in some untouchable world of comfort and luxury, but John had always struck her as someone carrying his own quiet loneliness. Maybe that's what had made him stop that day in the park. Not pity but recognition. The weeks passed quickly after that. Sarah's days were packed. Morning classes, afternoons with the kids, evenings poring over textbooks once they were asleep. Maria was an enormous help, treating the children like her own grandchildren, and John became more than a benefactor. He became a constant. He was there for school runs, occasional dinners, and long conversations in the quiet hours of the night when the city seemed to pause. Still, Sarah kept a careful boundary. She was aware of how their lives were beginning to intertwine, and though she felt a pull toward him, she wasn't ready to let herself fall into another kind of dependency. She needed to stand on her own, to prove to herself that she could build a future without leaning too hard on someone else's wealth. One Thursday evening she was working on a pharmacology paper when her phone buzzed. It was a message from an old friend, Lisa, from her days back in Buffalo. They hadn't spoken since before Sarah had left town with her ex. The message was short. "Saw your name in the NYU reentry newsletter. Are you really back? Would love to catch up." Sarah's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. It was like the past tapping gently at the present, reminding her of a life she'd once abandoned out of necessity. She replied quickly, agreeing to meet for coffee that weekend. Saturday came and Sarah met Lisa at a small cafe near Union Square. Lisa looked the same quick wit, same bohemian scarf, same wide smile. "You look amazing," she said after hugging Sarah tightly. "Seriously? What are you eating? You've got that glowing single mom who got her life together look." Sarah laughed, touched. "It's been a wild year." Over coffee she told Lisa the condensed version. Fainting in the park, waking up in a millionaire's townhouse, restarting her education. Lisa listened, wide-eyed, jaw slightly open. "That's unbelievable. Like a movie plot." Sarah nodded. "Sometimes I wake up and still wonder if I dreamed it all." Lisa leaned in, her tone more serious. "Just be careful, okay? People don't always do things out of pure kindness. Even the good ones sometimes have expectations they don't talk about." That thought haunted Sarah on her way home. Was she being naive? Was John really just helping because he wanted to? Or was she walking blindly into something she'd regret later? That night, she found John reading in the living room, legs stretched out on the couch, a half-empty bowl of popcorn beside him. "Can we talk?" she asked. He looked up, sensing her tone. "Of course." She sat opposite him, wringing her hands. "I met an old friend today. She said something that's been in the back of my mind for a while. I need to ask you something and I need an honest answer." He sat up straighter. "Okay. Why did you do all this for me?" "Really?" He didn't flinch. "Because I could. And because I saw myself in you. I saw someone trying not to drown. And I've had people help me in my life when I didn't deserve it. Maybe this was my way of paying it forward." Sarah stared at him, searching his face. "And you don't expect anything from me? Not now, not later?" John met her gaze steadily. "I expect you to live a full life. To finish school. To raise those amazing kids. That's it." She swallowed hard, emotion prickling her eyes. "That's more than enough." For the first time since arriving in New York, Sarah allowed herself to fully believe it. She wasn't in a debt she could never repay. She was in a story where someone had simply chosen to be good. And that, in itself, was rare and beautiful. Sarah was sitting on the floor of the nursery one rainy Tuesday afternoon, carefully folding a pile of the twins' tiny clothes while Jake played with wooden blocks beside her. The rhythm of her new life was finally beginning to feel steady. It was the kind of calm she hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. But just as she tucked the last onesie into the drawer, her phone buzzed. It was an email from the bursar's office at NYU. She opened it quickly, only for her breath to catch. A clerical error had flagged her tuition payment. John had covered it, of course, anonymously through a donation channel, but now the office was requesting verification, possibly resubmission of payment. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't the money, John would fix it in a heartbeat, but it was the feeling. The reminder that her security still rested in someone else's hands, no matter how kind those hands were. She sat in silence for a moment, watching Jake build and collapse his tower. Then, suddenly she felt overwhelmed, not just by the email but by everything. By the responsibility of being a mother, a student, a woman trying to reclaim the future she'd once buried under shame and fear. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, counting backward from 10. It was a trick she'd learned in therapy long ago. When she opened them again, Jake was looking at her, head tilted in curiosity. "Mama okay?" he asked. Sarah smiled and pulled him into her arms. "Mama's okay," she whispered. "Just thinking." That evening, after the kids were asleep and Maria had gone home, Sarah found John in his office, typing something into his laptop. He looked up when she entered. "Got a minute?" she asked. He nodded, pushing the chair back slightly. "Everything all right?" She handed him her phone with the email open. He read it quickly. "This is a system error. I'll call them in the morning. Nothing to worry about." But Sarah didn't sit down. "I know you'll fix it. That's not the point." He set the phone down and looked at her. "Then what is?" She struggled for words. I need to feel like I'm earning this life. Like I'm not just some charity case that you're taking care of." He shook his head. "You're not a charity case, Sarah. You're rebuilding. That's not the same." "Maybe not to you," she said, voice cracking, "but to me it's a very fine line." John stood and crossed the room, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Do you want to pay me back?" he asked softly. She blinked, confused. "What?" "I'm serious. We can work something out. A payment plan. Or you can volunteer. Intern for one of my companies. If that makes it feel more balanced, then let's do it." The offer floored her, not because of the opportunity but because he had heard her. He hadn't dismissed her fears or tried to smooth them over. He had acknowledged them. And that, more than anything, made her feel safe. "Let me think about it," she said, her voice small. "Take all the time you need," he replied. The next morning, Sarah woke up early and made pancakes with Molly, who had recently declared herself the official kitchen helper. As they flipped the golden circles together, Sarah's thoughts turned to her long-term plans. She'd started NYU again with only the goal of finishing her degree, but now something bigger was forming. A dream of becoming a nurse, maybe even a nurse practitioner. She loved biology, was fascinated by human anatomy, and most of all, she wanted to help others the way she had been helped. Later that day, she went to meet with her academic advisor. When the conversation turned to career paths, Sarah asked, a little shyly, "Do you think it's too late for me to go into nursing?" The advisor looked up and smiled. "Not at all. Actually, students like you, who've lived real life, who've faced hardships, often make the best nurses." That night, she told John over dinner. "I think I want to go into nursing," she said, almost bracing herself for doubt. But he just grinned. "Of course you do. It suits you. You're already halfway there, strong, compassionate, stubborn." She laughed. "You forgot tired." He raised his glass of water. "To tiredness. And to second chances." That weekend, John invited Sarah and the kids to visit the youth center where he'd started volunteering. It was in the South Bronx, a modest building surrounded by cracked sidewalks and graffiti-tagged walls. But inside, it was alive with color and laughter. Kids doing homework at long tables, volunteers handing out snacks, a mural in progress along one wall. Sarah walked through the rooms with wide eyes. "I had no idea you were doing all this," she said. John shrugged. "It was time I gave back in a way that wasn't just about writing checks." They spent hours there, the kids joining in art projects while Sarah chatted with the center director. On the ride home, something shifted in her. She realized that while she had spent so long trying to survive, now she was learning how to live. And part of living, she realized, was giving. That night, after the kids were tucked in and the house was quiet, she found John reading again in the living room. She sat down next to him. "I want to take you up on that offer," she said. "I want to earn my way through this. Internship, volunteer work, Whatever it is. I need to be part of something that matters. John smiled not just with his mouth but with his eyes. Welcome to the team. It was a beginning. Not the kind that happens suddenly with fanfare or dramatic turning points, but the kind that unfolds slowly with quiet choices and brave conversations. And Sarah, for the first time in years, felt like she was writing her own story, one honest decision at a time. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Sarah had started volunteering at the youth center every Saturday, slipping into a role that felt so natural it surprised her. The place buzzed with chaotic energy, teenagers with their stories written in slouched shoulders and guarded eyes, little kids running in circles, volunteers trying to create calm from the noise. But Sarah had a gift for reading between the lines. She could sense which kid needed space and which one needed a gentle question, and week after week she found herself connecting. One Saturday afternoon, while sorting donated clothes in the back room, she overheard a group of teens talking about college. One of the boys, Ethan, a lanky 17-year-old with sharp wit and a chip on his shoulder, said, "What's the point of college if you're just gonna end up broke anyway?" Something about his tone pulled Sarah in. She walked over, sat on the edge of the table and said, "I used to think the same thing. Actually dropped out twice before I got it right." They all looked at her, surprised. She wasn't what they expected. She was someone who'd lived through it, homelessness, hunger, shame, and made it out. And suddenly her story mattered to them. That night, John asked how it went at the center and she told him about Ethan. "It's crazy how they just need someone to tell them it's possible," she said. "Not sugarcoat it but just tell the truth. That it's hard but worth it." John nodded, watching her with pride that he didn't bother to hide anymore. "You know," he said, "you're doing more for those kids in one afternoon than I probably do all week." She rolled her eyes. "You fund the place, John. It wouldn't exist without you." "Still," he said quietly, "you walk in there and they see hope. I walk in and they see a donor." It was the first time he admitted what he sometimes felt, like all his money still couldn't buy the kind of connection Sarah created just by being real. Later that week, something unexpected happened. One of Sarah's old friends from Boston reached out through social media. Her name was Lindsay, and they hadn't spoken since the days Sarah was working night shifts and barely holding her life together. The message was simple: "Saw your post about NYU. So proud of you. Would love to catch up sometime." Sarah hesitated before replying. That chapter of her life felt so far away, like someone else had lived it. But curiosity and a strange longing made her say yes. They met for coffee at a quiet spot near Union Square, and Sarah was nervous walking in. But the moment she saw Lindsay, all the years between them melted. They talked for hours. Lindsay had gone through her own mess, an ugly divorce, a struggle with anxiety, and there was something comforting about trading war stories. "I thought you just disappeared," Lindsay said at one point. Sarah looked down. "I kind of did. I was embarrassed. My life just fell apart." Lindsay reached across the table. "And now it's falling back together. That's something to be proud of." The reconnection stirred something in Sarah. She realized she wasn't the only one with scars, and maybe it was time she stopped hiding hers like they were shameful. Over the next few days she started writing her story, not for anyone else, just for herself. At night, after the kids were asleep, she'd open her laptop and type. She wrote about the night she fainted in the park, about the crushing exhaustion, about the stranger who saved her. She wrote about the shelters, the small victories, the way her children's laughter kept her breathing when everything else told her to give up. It was messy and raw, but it was hers. One evening, John walked in on her typing and asked what she was working on. She minimized the document instinctively. "Just something personal," she said. He didn't push, just smiled and said, "I bet it's incredible." But later, after the house was quiet, she emailed him the first few pages. The next morning she found a sticky note on her coffee mug. "Please finish this. People need to read it." It was the quiet encouragement that gave her the strength to keep going. At the youth center the following Saturday, something strange happened. Ethan pulled her aside and said, "I filled out a community college application. Don't know if I'll go, but I did it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "That's amazing, Ethan." He shrugged, trying to act like it wasn't a big deal. "I just kept thinking about what you said. About how the worst thing is not trying." Sarah hugged him, and in that moment she realized something vital. Her story was not just hers anymore. It was a bridge, a light, a mirror. It was proof that broken things can be rebuilt, not to what they were, but into something new and strong and beautiful. That night, as she tucked Jake into bed, he asked, "Are you going to work tomorrow?" She kissed his forehead. "No, not tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll stay home and bake cookies." He smiled, half asleep already. As she watched him drift off, Sarah thought about how far they'd come. From a park bench to a warm house, from hunger to hope, from survival to meaning. And as she walked into the living room where John was waiting with 2 mugs of tea, she felt something deep and powerful settle inside her. Not peace exactly, but the kind of strength that comes after surviving a storm and realizing you can handle the next one. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The morning of the book launch was crisp and golden, one of those rare spring days in New York City when everything feels new again. Sarah stood on the steps of the Brooklyn Public Library, nervously adjusting the sleeves of her jacket. A modest crowd had already begun to gather inside. The copies of her book, The Park Bench, were stacked neatly on a table near the entrance, their matte covers reflecting soft light under the old brass fixtures. It felt surreal. A little over a year ago, she had passed out on a bench in Prospect Park with her 3 babies crying around her. Now she was here, an author, a voice, a survivor turned storyteller. The moment carried the weight of everything she had fought through, and as people filed into the room, Sarah wasn't thinking about sales or success. She was thinking about the women still struggling to get through today. Women who needed to know it was possible to come out the other side. John was already inside, speaking with a small group of guests, but he kept stealing glances at her. Their eyes met, and he gave her that look he always saved for private moments, the look that said he was proud in a way that went beyond words. Their relationship had grown into something rare and quietly powerful. Not a fairy tale, but something real, made of late-night talks, shared values, and mutual respect. He never once tried to rescue her again. Instead, he had become her partner in the truest sense. The children adored him, and Sarah often found herself watching them together with a sense of disbelief. They had found family not through perfection but through choice. During the event, Sarah stood at the front of the room, holding a microphone with slightly trembling fingers. She looked out at the audience, students, social workers, single mothers, readers, and took a deep breath. "I never planned to write a book," she began, voice steady despite her nerves. "But after everything that happened, I realized there were too many stories like mine that were never told. Stories about the edge of despair, yes, but also stories about kindness, about redemption, and about how one person's compassion can change everything." She spoke about the park, about the fainting spell, about the ambulance ride and the man who waited by her side until she woke up. She spoke about the shelters, the long nights, the decision to try again, for her kids, for herself. And then she spoke about John. Not his wealth or reputation, but the man who saw her when she felt invisible. Who didn't try to fix her but chose to stand beside her while she fixed herself. After the reading, people approached her with tear-filled eyes, thanking her for telling the truth. A woman named Denise whispered, "Your story gave me hope. I've been living in my car for 3 weeks with my daughter. I didn't know it could get better." Sarah squeezed her hand and said, "It can. Don't give up. Please don't give up." That night, after the event had ended and the lights had dimmed, Sarah and John took a quiet walk through the park where it all began. The bench was still there, empty and unremarkable to anyone passing by. But to her it was sacred. "I used to be afraid to come here," she admitted. "It reminded me of the worst day of my life." John reached for her hand. "And now," she smiled, "now it reminds me that the worst day of your life can be the beginning of something you never imagined." The next morning her story made local headlines. Within days it was picked up by national outlets. Not because it was dramatic but because it was honest. In a world drowning in curated perfection, Sarah's messy, unfiltered truth was like oxygen. Interviews poured in. Offers followed. But she was careful. She turned down anything that felt exploitative or flashy. She stayed grounded, choosing instead to use her platform to advocate for single mothers, better shelter funding, and affordable childcare. She wasn't interested in fame, just impact. Months later, a nonprofit approached her with a proposal. They wanted to name a new transitional housing facility after her. She said no at first. It felt too big, too final. But then they explained, they weren't naming it for her past. They were naming it for her fight. For every woman who thought she was too far gone. For every mother who thought she had failed. And so, the Sarah Lynn Center for Women and Children opened on a rainy October morning in downtown Brooklyn. She gave a speech, of course, and by then she was no longer the nervous woman with shaking hands. She spoke with strength, with clarity, with deep, earned wisdom. "This place isn't about charity," she told the crowd. "It's about belief. That no matter how dark your night, morning will come." Back home life was simpler. Jake started second grade and had made 2 best friends. Lily was obsessed with art and covered the walls with drawings. Baby Emma had just taken her first steps. Sarah and John had talked about marriage, but for now they were content in their rhythm, sharing a life built not on fantasy but truth. On quiet breakfasts, shared homework duty, and long walks that needed no words. One evening, Sarah sat on her porch watching the girls chase bubbles across the yard. She thought about that park bench again, not as a symbol of pain anymore but as a turning point. Sometimes life collapses before it begins to rebuild. Sometimes you have to faint to finally wake up. And sometimes a stranger sitting on a bench is more than just a passerby. Sometimes he's the beginning of everything. If you've liked this story, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends.